I've said for months that I think Georgia Tech is a playoff sleeper. National title contender, no. But then again, through 2 weeks, I don't quite know if Clemson is either. So let's get right to it, shall we? Clemson, Georgia Tech. Clemson, Georgia Tech. Kickoff at noon Eastern time this Saturday. Clemson being a 3.5-point favorite. We're bringing out the glasses for this show because I think we got to look at some of these games rather closely. Week 3 is once again being slated as this very weak, down-low weekend, and I couldn't disagree with that more, if I'm being honest. I think this is a much stronger slate of games than what we had in Week 2. We have a noon game. This is the one we're talking about today. We have a noon game in Clemson, Georgia Tech that I think is very impactful to the playoff race, impactful to both of these programs. This is a potential program win for Georgia Tech, and I'd also say it could be a program win or loss for Clemson. Clemson has a lot to lose in this game. Going to be 76 degrees Fahrenheit at kickoff, about 5 miles per hour. Clemson has that precious 3.5 number. Before I resume, please like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bells, and comment your thoughts down below. I love your engagement. Don't just hit the notification bell for my main channel. Hit the bell for any team playlists attached to the video if interested. If your team is not there or you're not interested, please navigate to my home channel page. Check out the playlists tab. Your team will be there if it's a Power 4 team. And hit the notification bell so that you can get notified when I cover that specific team. If you want additional content, bonus content, sign up as a paid member of the channel with the appropriate tier. I also give priority reply to members. And check out our Discord server. It's free. You get to interact with me. I get to pop in there. And the Discord server will notify you when we go live or when I upload videos. That makes me confident here that the books view Clemson as the better team, or at least they think that Clemson should be the better team. But does that mean they are the better team? Well, I want to explore that here. I'll look at that concept and dive into it, because whether or not Clemson actually is the better team than Georgia Tech would definitely determine this game, because I believe that Tech has some matchup advantages here over Clemson in addition to home field advantage. So I want to get to those and show that when you look at it here through 2 weeks, now I know that Tech has not played LSU at home. I know their second game's been against Gardner-Webb. They've played an easier strength of schedule. They have. But when you look at how these teams have played so far, Clemson's playing much closer to Georgia Tech's talent level, objectively watching how their players are blocking, missing assignments, or straight up being overpowered, especially on the offensive line. Clemson has really struggled to run the football. Klubnik is looking a little bit rusty. In fact, a little bit's putting it rather kindly. He's looked rusty, and that's shocking. I'm someone who thought he would win the Heisman. It would kind of be a slam dunk pick to win the Heisman, because even if he struggled against LSU, your schedule's one of the easiest in terms of all the preseason national title contenders. It's even easier than Oregon's or Penn State's, and their schedules are pretty easy compared to, say, Georgia's. I think they're probably easier than Ohio State's because they never played a Texas in the non-conference, even though Ohio State got them at home. You get the picture. Probably easier than an Alabama schedule. We could go on and on and on. Easier than LSU's schedule, I would certainly say. Easier than Texas's. It was the easiest schedule out of all the preseason national title favorites. Easier than Notre Dame's schedule. I'd argue it, I don't know if it's easier than Miami's, but I don't know if Miami was viewed by many as a preseason national title contender. And yet right now, Clemson has not lived up to that in the preseason. When you, through 2 games, have a points per play margin of 0.080, which means that you're only scoring that many more points per one of your plays than one of your opponent's plays, and one of your opponents is Troy, and the other is LSU, and LSU is not right now viewed as one of the top 5 national title contenders per the books, and especially not per ESPN's FPI, you probably have some issues. Even those who are very high on Clemson, my friend at Bald Father Bets, who runs a wonderful channel. You should check him out. Very intelligent, very insightful. He's taught me a lot, and his channel should have tens of thousands of subscribers, not a few hundred. So go over and help him reach that goal. Even he will admit, and he's very high on Clemson, even he will admit they have not looked good through 2 weeks. They have some things to clean up. Georgia Tech, I'm not saying they're perfect here, but Georgia Tech can run the football. Georgia Tech, if Haynes King is healthy, can put together a functional offense with a balanced attack. Georgia Tech has Eric Rivers, Dean Patterson, and Malik Rutherford, so they have receivers. Clemson has Bryant Wesco, TJ Moore, Antonio Williams. We know about Clemson's receivers. Georgia Tech's receivers are not as well known, and they are some of the better receivers nationally. When you look at scoring offense, Clemson has a 0.319 points per play offensively. That's worse than Michigan's. Michigan scores more points per play on offense than Clemson does. A lot of that has to do with play style. Michigan doesn't execute. They don't call as many plays per game. Clemson doesn't really fit the modern offensive meta of trying to slow down games, load manage, and establish game control. They still like on offense to use tempo and run as many plays as they can, at least for an offense of their talent level. Most offenses that are of Clemson's talent level call a slower game than Clemson does. And I think sometimes that goes to their detriment. Sometimes it underrates their offense in the advanced metrics, because if you run more plays, you usually aren't going to be as efficient with those plays unless you have a ridiculously insane generational, if not centennial offense, and Clemson doesn't have that. But in watching their game against Troy pretty closely, watching that entire LSU game, they clearly have issues offensively in a way that if Georgia Tech is healthy and they're not turning it over every other time like they were against Colorado, I don't know if Tech has quite that floor that we've seen from some of the quarters of football Clemson has played in. Both defenses, Clemson's defense is obviously better, and we'll talk about that throughout this segment, but I think Georgia Tech has some players on defense that need to be known as well. Per FPI, they're both 9.2 points better than the average team in college football. The books disagree with this. They'd probably have Clemson favored by 6.5, 7, 7.5 neutral field. That's why that line is at 3.5 right there. But look, I think that both of these teams are much closer together right now than many expected in the preseason. And many who believed in Tech in the preseason, I think also believed in Clemson. And I think that the reason some people are picking Georgia Tech to outright win here, or that there is that feeling, or the reason FPI is favoring Tech in this game, is telling us more about the reaction to Clemson than what we know about Georgia Tech. I think that through 2 weeks and the nature of Clemson having more returning production and more talent, more known players, I think that this is saying more about Clemson than Georgia Tech. I think we know more about Clemson to this degree than Georgia Tech. Doesn't mean that Clemson can't improve, but I've said in my reaction video to Troy and Clemson that I am beginning to be skeptical of Clemson being a national title contender. Still believe in them strongly as an ACC contender. They should expect to win the ACC. I think it's still a race between them and Miami. But Georgia Tech may have something to say about that. And Georgia Tech, in addition to having Haynes King at quarterback, in addition to having excellent wide receivers, I also think the Yellow Jackets have, quite the offensive line. And I also think that, look, they have quite the defensive line too. I love what Georgia Tech has on their roster. I think that this early in the year, I don't know if the status of Haynes King, don't know if he's going to be fully healthy for this game, but Ethan McKinney, Harrison Moore, Keelan Rutledge, Malachi Carney on the offensive line, and then you have Akello Stone, Jordan Vandenberg in that nose tackle, D-tackle spot, the defensive tackle room. Tech's interior trench play and then their tackles on offense are some very impressive players, exceptional players. And then for Clemson, we know about, TJ Parker, DeMonte Capehart, Peter Woods, Will Helt, wonderful D-line, an O-line that has Blake Miller, Tristan Lay, We already know about the receivers in Cade Klubnik. I will say, I'm pretty concerned about how this matchup could go in the trenches. I am somewhat concerned about that. We'll see where this game ends up going, but I would be concerned if I were a Clemson fan about the trenches. What I'd be concerned about if I were a Tech fan is whether or not my quarterback is going to be healthy. Georgia Tech has good enough players in the trenches where I think that they can stalwart a Clemson offensive line and a Clemson rushing attack that admittedly has struggled quite a bit. With Clemson, it's important here that either Klubnik is on time or he's accurate and he's, doing the right things. He's playing a better game than he has in the first 2 weeks where he's been off, to put it kindly. Or if he isn't on time, if he once again is having a week full of struggles, you need to find a way to run the ball, or you need to pray that Haynes King is not in this game, or you need to force turnovers like Colorado did and then capitalize on them just enough to eke out with a win. King being healthy, I think, is the biggest question for Georgia Tech by a mile. If King is healthy, I think that Tech should actually be favored in this game. If he is hurt, then Clemson should be favored by probably more than 3.5 points. I do truly think that King is that valuable of a player here. That's what I think. Looking at the different type of styles, Tech likes to slow things down. Clemson likes to speed things up. They like to, maximize their talent advantage. Georgia Tech likes to minimize their talent disadvantage. That's why they run the offenses that they do. I think a big part of the reason why. Georgia Tech with King, you have Jamal Haynes, then you have the O-line that we talked about. You have the receivers that can keep the defense honest, and then you have a quarterback that can really run a option offense to perfection. Add that element. Not that Tech runs an option offense. It's a power spread. It's inspired by what Todd Monken ran at Georgia. Buster Faulkner, Georgia Tech's OC, worked under him, brought many of those concepts to the Yellow Jackets. But with King, they can really do almost anything if he's healthy and playing a good game. So the contrast of styles is important. The different QB situations are very important. Defensive line play could very well decide this game. Trench play always does, but I mainly want to focus on D-line play and also run blocking. I think that Tech's offensive line is good enough to protect King if healthy, and King's also, aware enough and athletic enough and good enough of a QB to where if he's healthy, he can find ways to escape the pocket or make a positive play out of nothing. It's similar with Klubnik, especially considering I don't think Tech has the talent on the defensive front that LSU did, to where they almost completely shut Klubnik down. And I also think Klubnik has played flukishly bad through 2 games in a way that if this continues, he definitely regress from where he was last year, and I don't think that's going to happen. I almost think that's not possible. So I think more likely than not, he's due for a rebound here at some point, and we have to factor that in. Last but not least, we have 2 good QBs at the worst, 2 elite QBs if they play to their potential, and we have amazing wide receiver cores. And we have secondaries that have some players who are a little iffy. I don't think anyone's saying that Georgia Tech has elite receivers. I don't think anyone exactly is going to say that. Or not elite receivers, my bad. I don't think anyone is going to be saying here that Georgia Tech has elite defensive backs. Rodney Shelley, Afmari Harvey. I think Harvey's pretty good. Clayton Powell-Lee, Omar Daniels, Jai Gilmore. It's an old DB group. All of them are seniors. I think they do run a good operation, but Clemson theoretically should have a talent advantage here, and that is going to mean a lot. But Clemson, I think the Tigers at secondary also have some things that they have to deal with and some weaknesses. Avion Terrell and Ashton Hampton graded out pretty highly last year at corner, but Terrell's been highly penalized, and their safeties in nickel, Khalil Barnes, Ricardo Jones, Ronan Hannafin, Misson Kelly, or maybe it's Meeson Kelly. I hope I didn't mispronounce that name too badly. They're not as good. They're not as talented as the corners are. I think Tom Allen runs a wonderful defense. I genuinely believe that. But look, Georgia Tech also has a really good offense, and I don't think Clemson has the type of defense yet that Ohio State, Texas, Penn State, and Georgia do. I don't think that they are quite there. Some other things to consider in this game as I lean into my pick here, I would say are teams, and I would say coaching. I am going to come and pick Georgia Tech to beat Clemson, and the reason I'm going to do that mainly has to do with coaching. Also, on the standpoint of special teams, neither of these special teams units are exactly known to be special. That's not their forte here. But Tech's forte has been their coaching. That's been their forte. You know, Brent Key beats ranked teams at home. Last year he beat Miami. He also nearly beat Georgia on the road, ranked opponent. The year before that, he also beat Miami on the road. And I forget. They beat North Carolina when North Carolina was ranked in 2023. And look, last year they went, 7-5, lost to Vanderbilt in the bowl game, but they had impressive performances like that game against Miami, or how they were able to beat Florida State at the beginning of the year. Florida State ended up being pretty bad, but they punch above their weight class. Clemson hasn't punched with their weight class in years, and it doesn't look like they're that much different this year. I think Georgia Tech wins, and I think they cover that 3.5-point line. And I ultimately think that, look, their consistency is going to win them this football game. The fact that they have an identity, and I don't quite know what Clemson's identity is. I know what they want to do. We've seen this before with Garrett Riley at TCU and his first 2 years at Clemson. They want to be able to run the football. They want to be explosive. And they just haven't shown much of that this year. Last year, they didn't show any of that really at all against big-time opponents outside of the Texas game, where they were able to have some success against Texas defensive backs more than any other passing offense in the playoffs that Texas faced, Arizona State, and surprisingly, Ohio State. But I think that Clemson has advantages through the air here, at least theoretically, and some of this is factoring in my expectation that Klubnik will bounce back, and I don't exactly know what King's health is. Clemson should be able to beat Tech's secondary more often than Tech's secondary beats their receivers, or the DNs beat the tackles to get to the QB. And I think that Clemson's pass defense and pass rush should do a pretty good job limiting Tech's passing offense, but they aren't dominant there. I don't think that Clemson's passing attack or defense is a dominant strategy over Tech's pass defense or offense. I do, however, think that with Akello Stone and Jordan Vandenberg and Kyle Eford, I do not think that Adam Randall and then Ryan Lithincum, Colin Sadler, Walker Parks, and Cade Klubnik, I don't think that Clemson is going to have a lot of success running the ball here. I don't think so at all. I think that Clemson will be one-dimensional in this game. It will all be about Clemson's defense. No duh. It's one of the better defenses in the world in college football. But I also think that, Klubnik so far, he's had I think 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He's averaging 213 passing yards per game. The reason he threw that pick 6 against Troy was not really on him. It was on his offensive line. They just don't, there's something about them that's off, and I don't know what it is. Don't know why it is. I could not fix that problem. I don't make enough money, nor am smart enough to do so. But I can tell you that they have problems that I think are a nightmare to try and work around against a team like Georgia Tech, provided King is healthy, provided that. I also think that Georgia Tech, their staff overall is probably equal with Clemson. Their talent isn't, but I think their staff is up there with Clemson's. And if you want to really place an emphasis on game management, which is what matters here, and an emphasis on the head coach, I think that Brent Key right now is a better head coach than Dabo Swinney. I do. I think at the end of the day, that's going to be a big reason why Georgia Tech wins here and why they cover that 3.5-point line. Thank you so much for watching College Football with Sam. Remember to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bells, and comment your thoughts down below. Again, for the notification bells, don't just hit the bell for my main channel, hit it for any team playlists attached, or if you're not interested in those teams, navigate to my channel homepage, to the playlists tab. There will be a playlist for your favorite team if it's a Power 4 team. Hit the notification bell for that playlist so you can get notified when I mention them or talk about the conference broadly that they reside in. If you want bonus content, sign up as a paid member. And our Discord server is totally free. You get to interact with me and several other diehard football fans in there. So do those things. Most of them are free. And if you want to go the extra mile, there's always the Patreon page and YouTube memberships.